Hey guys. Tonight we begin in the soggy stillness of a Victorian schoolyard where the air smells faintly of coal smoke, damp wool, and the stubborn sweetness of crushed grass underfoot. It's just past 8 a.m. A sleepy child in a buttoned-up coat and slightly too tight boots are trudging across gravel and puddles toward the squat stone building that claims most of your waking hours. You're not carrying a textbook this morning. Not a slate board. Not even your lunch, which you stuffed in your bag half wrapped in wax paper. No. In your left pocket is something more important, more delicate, and slightly rattly. A snail shell. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake, tell me where you're re-listening from and what time it is. I love hearing how far our sleepy history travels. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You finger the shell carefully through the cloth of your coat, smooth, curved, a soft spiral no bigger than a thimble. You found it yesterday, under a soggy leaf behind the bakery. And you spent an absurdly long time brushing it clean with the end of a horsehair paintbrush, until it gleamed. Not because you love snails' knots, particularly, but because today is Natural History Day, and your class is bringing their finds to school. You're 10, maybe 11, old enough to tell a Roman snail from a garden one, but not yet old enough to explain why every child at your school is required to maintain what your teacher proudly calls a specimen logbook. Outside the schoolhouse door, other children have gathered, clutching small boxers, tins, old handkerchiefs, tied into bundles. You see labels peeking from coat pockets, some scrawled in pencil, others in careful fountain pen. Helix palmatea, acquired under Mrs. Linton's greenhouse. Found near the mill pond, possible new type. There's a sense of occasion, of ceremony. Victorian Britain was a country obsessed with collecting stamps, feathers, pressed ferns, beetles pinned to corkboard with Latin names, even bones, if you knew the right farmhand. And naturally, this gentle mania for order and display trickled down into education, especially at your school, where Mr. Halberd, your teacher, and proud amateur malacologist, believes that children learn best when they touch the shell of creation itself. He says that every Monday, you shuffle inside as the bell rings, not an electric chime, but an actual handbell, swung enthusiastically by a girl named Elsie, whose job it is this week to announce the start of lessons. She takes her work very seriously. The classroom smells like damp paper, chalk dust, and wet socks. Your desk, carved with decades of initials and inkwell drips, holds a logbook, a ruler, and a small wooden box lined with dried moss. That's where your shell goes. You unwrap it with care, set it in the box, step back, and look. It's very small. You worry for a moment it won't impress anyone. But you've written a label in your best cursive, spiral form, modest gloss, found near bakery refuse, color-warm biscuit. Mr. Halberd would be proud. He paces slowly between desks now, his hands behind his back, stopping occasionally to examine someone's collection with a muttered "Tim." You watch as he peers at a particularly large shell with a magnifying glass and declares it resolutely domestic. You don't know what that means. The girl who brought it beams anyway. Your cricket-like nervous energy begins to settle. Everyone's here. Everyone has something. The boy next to you even brought 2 shells, though one is clearly just a rock with a hole in it. He labeled it speculative gas. Mr. Halberd claps his hands once. Today, we begin our journey into the slow and the spiral. You may now open your logbooks to page 6. Observations in texture and modesty of shell. You sigh, settle in. Dip your pen into ink. This is going to be a long, quiet morning. But not a bad one. There's something oddly comforting about it, all the scraping of pens, the rustle of specimen boxers, the light through the rain-streaked windows. No one's fighting, no one's crying, just 30 children, writing slowly about shells they found in hedges, gardens, ditches, and behind grocers' shops. Somewhere faintly, you hear the wind rattle the bell outside. The coal stove in the corner ticks as it cools. A page turns, and your tiny snail shell sits silently in its box, saying nothing. Doing nothing, but somehow making this whole day feel a little more meaningful. You dip your pen again. Texture? Mildly ridged. Edges imperfect. Still beautiful. The ink on your pen begins to thicken. Too much time in the inkwell. Again so. You blot it carefully on the edge of your blotting paper. A small puff of blue spreads like a puddle on the page, threatening to overtake the word biscuit. You decide it gives the entry character. Mr. Halbert begins the day's lesson proper by drawing, on the blackboard, a very large spiral. It takes up the entire surface. One long curve, tightening inward until it almost disappears. At the end, he dots a small white circle. This, he says dramatically, is the form that governs all good snail shells. And, perhaps, the universe. A few children blink. One yawns. A girl named Margaret mutters, looks like a cinnamon bun. Mr. Halbert ignores her. He launches into a brief but rhapsodic description of gastropodal geometry, gesturing with his hands like a magician revealing invisible forces. Nature, he says, rarely wastes effort. And so she curls. You write this in your margins. Nature curls. Your shell sits on the desk in its moss-lined bed, looking rather pleased with itself. You angle it to catch the light just right. The sheen of it is almost pearly. You wonder how something that once slid slowly through rotting leaves can now sit here like a tiny sculpture, elevated to subject of serious study. Mr. Halbert starts handing out pages from an old book, fragile illustrations of shell diagrams with names so complicated they feel like spells. Limni Sepia nemoralis classilia bedentata. You don't know how to pronounce them. No one does. But they sound important. Each student is to match their specimen with one of the illustrations and write an imagined life story for the snail that once lived in it. Mr. Halbert calls this creative naturalism, a phrase he invented last term and has used at least twice a week ever since. You pick Sepia. It has a thick, cheerful-looking spiral and reminds you of a toffee dropped on a carpet. Your story begins. Gerald the snail lived a modest life beneath the elderberry hedge. He dreamed of climbing the brick wall, but never quite managed it. A few desks over, a boy describes his snail as a lonesome wanderer of the cabbage patch. Another claims his was the ruler of an empire of slugs. One girl writes a sonnet. In rhyming Latin, there is something oddly wholesome about this exercise. No competition, no grades. Just 30 children quietly inventing personalities for slow creatures. And all around you, the sound of nibs on paper, the faint ticking of the classroom clock, and the occasional clunk of someone accidentally knocking over their specimen box. You look around. Most kids are hunched in concentration. One boy is fast asleep on his notebook, face smooshed into a perfect crescent. A snail-like posture, really. And your cricket tucked carefully in your coat pocketies. Some students keep both these stirring lightly. He makes no sound. Just a faint tickle as he shifts position. You've carried him for 2 weeks now, mostly out of habit. Mr. Halbert has a soft spot for crickets, believing they help children concentrate. He may be right. You write another line. Gerald disliked carrots but tolerated radishes. Outside, rain begins to fall light, steady, and unmistakably British. The kind of rain that's less about getting wet and more about making everything slightly blurrier. You wonder if snails liked rain. You suppose they did? In the front of the room, Mr. Halbert is now carefully labeling a giant wall chart titled Local Mollusks of Note. Beneath it, he places students' drawings and shell sketches, each pinned with a hand-cut tag. Student Arnold H. Species. Probable cornu. Aspersum. Mood. Bashful. Your shell will go up there eventually. Gerald's biography may be short, but it's heartfelt. You carefully sign your name below the paragraph and draw a tiny leaf for artistic flair. The bell rings again, this time for break. Children rise slowly, like snails themselves. They stretch, yawn, and shuffle to the door, still holding boxers, cages, notebooks. No one runs. It's not that kind of school. Besides, most of them don't want to spill anything. You walk to the display chart, hand your shell and story to Mr. Halbert, who examines it with great care and murmurs, a contemplative spirit. Good. Gerald joins the wall. Your pocket cricket stirs again. Still silent. Still warm. You step out into the corridor, the rain tapping on the windows, the faint scent of boiled cabbage drifting from the kitchen hall. It's a slow day, a soft day, a snail sort of day. Break time in a Victorian school is a curious thing, not quite restful, not quite chaotic. More of a reshuffling, really. You and your classmates file out into the cloistered yard, boots squelching across the damp cobblestones, steam rising from shoulders like small ghosts evaporating into the gray. You stay near the wall, your coat pulled tight against the drizzle, one hand resting protectively over your cricket's cage and the other cradling your empty specimen box. Gerald is on the chart now. You're free of responsibility. But still, you watch the ground instinctively, just in case. Some children are skipping rope. Others gather under the overhang to trade stories of snails they couldn't catch in time. It slipped into the compost bin, too quick, or compare ink stains on their fingers. You notice that many of the girls are exchanging not shells, but drawings carefully rendered spirals shaded in graphite, labeled in cursive. World, glossy, mellow gray. They tuck them into little albums, pages soft with wear. It's a quieter sort of collecting, less messy, more artistic. You sidle up beside Margaret, whose own album is bulging at the seams. May I, you ask? She flips it open. Inside, dozens of hand-drawn shells, some colored with faint watercolor washes. Beneath each one, a line of imagined poetry. This shell once sang to the stones at dusk. It curled around its dreams like ribbon. They're beautiful. You ask her how long she's been making them. Since Easter, she says. My aunt says I should draw something useful. But shells don't talk back. You nod. Understand exactly what she means. Inside the schoolhouse, Mr. Halbert moves past the window, hauling a small tin cabinet from the library annex. You recognize it. The classification cabinet, normally used only on Fridays. Your heart gives a small, irrational leap. Today must be special. Sure enough, as the bell clangs again and you shuffle back inside, you find the cabinet open at the front of the room. Its drawers pulled out like steps in a spiral staircase. Each holds a different kind of shell, real ones. Some chipped, some pristine, labeled in fading ink on tiny cards. Mr. Halbert invites students to come forward one by one to match their finds or drawings with official specimens. The goal, he says, is to build a lineage of observation. You take your place in line. The cabinet smells faintly of camphor and old paper. When it's your turn, you search for something like Gerald. You don't find an exact match, but in the third drawer, nestled between a cracked whelk and a mystery mollusk, marked only with a question mark, is a shell with a similar tilt. You pull the card. possibly sapir, some ambiguity. Found behind Buttershop, 1843. It feels like fate. Mr. Halberd lets you keep the card to copy into your logbook. You return to your desk and begin a fresh entry. The Buttershop shell, cousin to Gerald, spiraled modestly, possibly indecisive. You pause, brush, hovering. Then add, was probably fond of damp places and long silences. Around you, the classroom hums with quiet focus. Brushes, swish, ink drips, a boy coughs, a cricket maybe yours chirps once, unsure. Historians still argue whether these early natural science activities had any real merit, whether young children identifying snails in chalky schoolrooms led to anything at all. Some say it was busy work. Others say it sparked curiosity. You say it gave you something to notice, to care for, to name. Outside, the rain deepens. The windows fog. And somewhere behind you, the cabinet of shells stands open like a story still being written. You glance at the card again. Possibly some ambiguity. You smile. A good description for most things in life. It's the afternoon now, and the classroom has settled into its post-lunch quiet, the kind of slow hum that follows boiled potatoes and boiled everything else. Outside, the rain has lightened to a misty veil, draping the windows in silver. Inside, your class prepares for the weekly nature walk. You are handed your supplies without ceremony. A small tin box lined with blotting paper, a folded waxed cloth, a pencil stub, and most importantly, a loner field guide titled Simple Shells of the English Countryside. It has been read so many times its cover has curled like a fern, and the pages smell like damp wool and chalk dust. Mr. Halberd leads you all to the rear door of the school, where he insists you take a moment to adopt the proper spirit of collection, which seems to mostly involve sipping your coat and looking thoughtful. Then you're off. The world beyond the gate is still wet, still gray, still gloriously quiet. You and two classmates follow a muddy path down past the orchard, where last autumn's apples have turned into soft pillows for beetles. Your boots squish with each step. Your tin box rattles faintly with every shift. The air smells of moss, earth, and very determined lichen. You pass hedges where ivy clings like sleepy fingers. You duck under low branches, and soon everyone begins the ritual of searching. Some students dig beneath rotting leaves, others gently pry at fence posts. You find yourself kneeling beside a toppled log, where the bark peels back like a blanket. Beneath it, movement. And there it is. A snail, moving ever so slowly across a bit of damp bark. Its shell is streaked with soft green, as if moss itself tried to paint it and gave up halfway through. You lean closer. It doesn't flinch, just inches onward, unconcerned by your looming shadow. You watch it for a moment. There is something deeply peaceful about it, the quiet confidence of a creature that has nowhere better to be. You gently lift it with the edge of your cloth, nestle it into your box, and write on the inside lid, found beside fallen birch, green striping. A girl nearby squeals. She's found what she swears is a Roman snail. Its huge, relatively speaking gin, already retreating dramatically into its shell like a theater actor taking a bow. Mr. Halberd arrives, nods solemnly, and declares it impressively reserved. The nature walk continues along a narrow path flanked by brambles. Every so often, a child calls out with a fiendish yell here, a beetle casing there. Once, even a perfectly round stone that looks suspiciously like a marble. Everyone stops to look. Everyone pretends it matters deeply. In a way, eventually, your class comes to a wooden bridge that crosses a trickling stream. It's no more than 4 planks wide and only slightly wobbly. You all cross in pairs, some clutching their boxers like rare treasure, others holding them out dramatically like explorers. On the far side is a clearing. There, on a flat stump, Mr. Halberd produces a large sheet of oilskin and spreads out today's finds, not to judge, not to grade, but to admire. It becomes a gallery of damp marvels, spirals, swirls, cracked and pristine, mud-speckled and gleaming. Each shell gets a moment, a murmured comment, a pencil sketch. Sometimes a soft chuckle, like when someone finds a peanut shell and tries to argue it was a foreign snail. You place your mossy green snail down gently. It doesn't move. You don't mind. It's enough that it's there. Historians still argue whether these field trips taught real science, whether letting children name snails things like Sir Slimesworth helped or hindered taxonomy. But as you kneel in the muddy clearing, rain dripping from your cap, a snail in your box, and quiet pride in your chest, you're certain of one thing. You notice something small, you gave it a name, and you remembered to bring it home. The group begins the slow trek back to school. No one rushes, no one complains. You walk together, like a gentle caravan of thinkers, each carrying a shell, a story, or a smear of mud on their sleeve. And for once, it feels like enough. Back in the classroom, the light has turned gold, filtered through thick glass and misty air. It pools like tea in the corners of the room. Boots are kicked off, coats hang dripping by the door, and cheeks are pink from the walk. The room smells faintly of moss, wet wool, and boiled barley from the kitchen below. Your snail rests quietly in its tin on the desk, the box now slightly smudged with thumbprints and field dust. The penciled note you left, maybe an optimist, makes you smile every time you glance at it. Mr. Halberd returns to his podium, now holding something large and round wrapped in mud. When he unwraps it, the class gasps. It's a giant ammonite fossil, spiraled and ridged, the size of a dinner plate. Not a snail, he begins, but a cousin. A very old cousin. He places it carefully on a velvet cloth in the center of the table. Children lean forward, wide-eyed, some craning their necks as if it might move. The fossil is dull, gray and brown, with bits of quartz glittering in the crevices like starlight trapped in stone. You stare at it, entranced. The ammonite is still, impossibly still. And yet it speaks of ocean floors and ancient tides, of eras when the sky was filled with steam and the only birds were fish with ideas. Mr. Halberd taps the edge of the shell gently with a bone pointer. Over 100 million years old, he says. Imagine a snail the size of a cat. Imagine it floating, weightless, through a warm prehistoric sea, turning slowly with the current. No hurry, no rush. You do imagine it. You picture a massive spiral drifting under dim green waters, casting faint shadows on seabeds covered in things with too many legs and not enough sense. You imagine it humming, softly, like your cricket. You realize you are sleepy, but content. Mr. Halberd continues. Victorians loved fossils, not just because they were old, but because they were beautifully structured, predictable, elegant in their logic. Some believed ammonites had magical properties. Others just liked how they looked on a mantelpiece. He passes the fossil around, one desk at a time. When it reaches you, you hold it carefully, both hands cupped beneath its cool weight. It smells faintly of chalk and mystery. You turn it slowly, watching the ridges catch the light. There's something thrilling about the thought that this thing was alive once, that it curled itself this way on purpose, that it might have seen a world with no humans, no books, no classrooms. And now, it's part of your lesson. You hand it off gently, then return your attention to your desk, where your little snail seems to glow brighter in contrast. He's no fossil, not yet. He's new, small, present. You jot down a note. Ammonite equals past. Snail equals now. Both spiral. I spiral too. Later, Mr. Hulbert begins the last part of the day's exercise. Sketching. Each student is to draw their snail from memory or from observation, and below it, write one line of reflection. Not scientific, not poetic, just honest. You begin carefully, outlining the gentle slope of the shell, the small line of its spiral, the smudge where a bit of moss still clings. You add shading, a bit of shadow, maybe too much personality, but you don't mind. And then, beneath it, you write, "It didn't rush me, so I didn't rush it." Mr. Halberd walks by, pauses, and rests a hand lightly on your shoulder. "Very good," he says. It asks the first thing he has said to you all day that wasn't an instruction. Historians still argue whether Victorian shell collecting had any lasting educational value. But today, you held something ancient. You named something small. You looked closely, and that might just be the beginning of something. You're back home now, shoes drying awkwardly by the hearth. Your tin box placed neatly on the small wooden table near the window where the light hits just right for drawing or daydreaming. The house's quiet older sister out running errands. Mother in the pantry muttering at jars. Father not yet home from the workshop. It's your favorite time. In your pocket, the shell. Not the field one from To Death at One, with its hopeful green spiral, is still resting comfortably in its moss-lined tin, waiting for tomorrow's logbook entry. No, this is another shell. Smaller, slightly chipped. Gerald's shell. You asked to bring it home for the weekend. Mr. Hulbert didn't hesitate. He said, "Of course. Just mind the edges." He's modest, but sharp. You smile at that. You place Gerald gently in the center of your desk and sit, notebook open, pencil ready. The page is clean, waiting. You think for a long time before writing. Outside, the rain has gone. In its place, birdsong faint, hesitant, as if even the sparrows are unsure what to do with sunlight after such a drizzly stretch. You begin to sketch Gerald again, but this time not from above. No, from memory, from feeling. His shell leans slightly, just so. The ridges are not perfectly even. You capture the tilt of his spine, the subtle flaw in the spiral. It makes him look like he's thinking. And below the sketch, you write Gerald Patrian Snail of slow days. Found near bakery, likely fond of crumbs. You pause, consider adding more, but sometimes that's enough. You glance around your room, where other tiny bits of your naturalist adventures have gathered press leaves from September. A pebble shaped like a comma, a feather you found that blew in during music class and now guards your pencil jar like a lazy falcon. Everything in its place, everything with a memory. You pull out your specimens and oddities journal, the one not sanctioned by the school. It's less structured, more chaotic. A place for strange finds, things that don't quite fit the curriculum. In it, a sketch of a mushroom shaped like an old man's ear. A drawing of a bent pin that looks like a beetle's leg. A leaf with bite marks that seem suspiciously alphabetical. You flip to a new page and begin a fresh entry, titled Snail Reflections. You write. Not all shells spiral the same way. Some turn left, some turn right, some just wobble and hope for the best. Maybe I'm a left-turner, or a wobbler. You draw a line beneath that and doodle a tiny cricket, because, of course, your pocket companion is watching, quiet as ever, but unmistakably present. You remove his cage, place it beside Gerald's shell, and sit back. For a long moment, you just watch the two of them. One unmoving, one shifting slightly, and tinny twitching. Two beings from different kingdoms of life, united by the fact that they both take their time. You think of Mr. Halbert's ammonite frozen in time. You think of Margaret's shell sketches, blooming with graphite like tiny gray flowers. You think of the boy who wrote about the Emperor of Slugs. Historians still debate the educational value of Victorian natural history projects. They question whether children learned biology or just learned how to copy diagrams and write poems about puddles. But here, in your quiet room, on a sunny patch of afternoon light, you know what you learned. You learned to notice. You learned to listen to small things. You learned that not everything fast is good. You sip your lukewarm tea. Your cricket chirps once, and for a long while, nothing happens, which is exactly how you like it. Sunday arrives, wrapped in silence. It is less so early, even the birds haven tea, fully committed to the idea of the day. The sky outside your window is the color of old milk, soft and blank, a perfect background for nothing to happen at all. And yet, you're awake. You pad softly to the table where Gerald's shell still rests on its mossy cloth, and where your cricket, ever loyal, has taken up residence beside a cracked thimble that you pretend is his teacup. He hasn't chirped yet this morning. Neither have you. There's a certain holiness to this hour, a kind of hush that fills the room not because something is missing, but because everything is simply still. You sit with your knees up, journal in hand, and begin writing the next installment of Gerald's imaginary life. Gerald dreamed of puddles shaped like moons. He once mistook a biscuit for a hill. This is not assigned homework. No one will read it but you, and that's what makes it feel important. You spend the morning gathering tiny bits for Gerald's temporary shrine. Nothing dramatic, just a flat button you think might make a good garden stone. A strip of cloth with a red thread that could be a scarf, and a pencil stub you taped to the wall beside his shell, labeled Gerald's weather stick. By mid-morning, you're outside. It's not raining, miraculously, and the garden behind the house is quiet, except for the occasional flap of a pigeon, swing, or the soft hiss of a neighbor sweeping stone steps. You walk slowly, eyes on the ground, looking for nothing in particular and everything at once. There's mud, of course, always mud, and footprints from someone's boots, a broken pot, a single glove, and near the garden wall, a line of snail trails, like someone scribbled silver across the dirt and forgot to finish the sentence. You crouch down. There's no sign of the snails now, but you can see where they were. One trail goes in a perfect spiral. Another just stops. You imagine Gerald leading the others like a conductor, directing them in quiet symphonies of slime. You chuckle at the thought, then feel a twinge of guilt. Gerald's shell is empty, after all. His journey is already ended. Or maybe, begun again. Victorian children, like you, were amateur collectors. Yes, but also part-time storytellers, even if no one used those words. In a world that prized order, shells gave you the excuse to be curious, quiet, precise. They let you sit in the mud without explanation. They gave shape to your wandering thoughts. Historians still argue how much real science was learned in these moments. Whether future biologists were truly forged under schoolroom eaves, dripping with rain and ink. But what they miss is the space that collecting created. You weren't memorizing. You were noticing. You weren't tested. You were trusted to observe, to name, to wonder. You rise and dust off your knees. A worm wriggles in the soil where you knelt. You say hello and then sorry. As your shadow falls over it, back inside, you pull out your personal chart, a large page you've reserved just for this purpose. It's labeled at the top, Snail Shells I've Loved. And beneath that, you've begun a map not of the countryside, but of your encounters, noted by smell, sound, mood, and weather. Not location, Each shell gets an icon. A note, Gerald, biscuit-colored, slightly anxious. Stream snails smelled like mint. Left early, field shell. Traveled sideways. No regrets. You draw the newest one, the mossy green from the walk. You haven't named them yet. That's okay. You will. As the morning becomes afternoon and the sun begins, the slow climb toward its peak, you sit back, mug of lukewarm barley tea in hand, and admire your work. The chart is not accurate, it is not scientific, but it is yours. A record of time spent moving slowly. Your cricket stirs again, still no chirp, but the shift of weight against your chest is enough. You smile, whisper, "It's Sunday," as though that explains everything. And perhaps it does. Monday returns with the slow certainty of porridge. You dress by habit now. Thick socks, soft shirt, slightly stiff collar that scratches a little no matter how you tuck it. Your satchel swings lightly as you head out the door, its contents carefully packed. Gerald's shell, now wrapped in clean cloth. Your logbook, freshly sharpened pencil tucked inside. And, of course, your cricket, cozy in his cage like a secret you've decided to keep. The sky is a milky gray. A thin mist coats the rooftops like breath frozen in place. The walk to school feels quieter than usual, fewer carts rattling past, fewer boots in the mud. The world seems to be holding its breath, and you walk right through it, letting the stillness settle over your shoulders like a wool blanket. When you arrive, the classroom is already warm with coal fire and chatter. Mr. Halbert is leaning over a stack of books at his desk, humming what might be a folk song, about weather, or maybe toast. He glances up, nods once, and returns to his sorting. You sit, slide out your things, place Gerald gently on your desk, and notice something strange. There's a new chart on the blackboard, drawn in white chalk. It looks like a wheel with 6 segments labeled in looping cursive. Curiosity, observation, description, illustration, reflection, revision. Underneath it, the collector's spiral. Mr. Halbert clears his throat, tapping his pointer gently against the slate. This, he says, is how knowledge grows. Not in straight lines, but in spirals. Just like our friends. He gestures toward a row of pinned shells, including yours. The Victorians believed a well-trained mind began in the field, matured through drawing, and refined itself by asking questions. The spiral, he continues, is not just the shape of a shell, it's the path of your own thinking. You blink. That sounds awfully important for a Monday, but as the morning rolls on, he guides the class through each stage, beginning with a review of your field notes. You flip back through your logbook. Ink smudges, leaf prints, doodles, and hastily scrawled descriptions. One reads simply. Then you move to illustration. Mr. Halbert passes out new paper-thick, toothy stuff and instructs you to draw your snail shell again. Not to replicate, he says, but to notice what you missed. You pick up your pencil and begin. Slowly, carefully. This time, you see details you hadn't recorded before: the tiny pitting near the apex, the faint discoloration on one side, the way the spiral tilts ever so slightly, as if the shell were caught mid. You note these things down, feeling oddly proud. Then comes reflection. A moment to pause and ask, what surprised me? You're right. That something so still can feel so full of motion. And below that, I like the way it doesn't hurry me. At your side, your cricket shifts again, tapping once against the side of the cage. Not loudly, just enough to say, yes. The final stage revision is more suggestion than rule. Mr. Halbert reminds. The class that a good collector is always open to being wrong. Perhaps, he says, your shell wasn't found beside a bakery, but a laundry cart. Perhaps the snail wasn't curious, but just lost. That's fine. Curiosity must bend, just like a spiral. You glance down at Gerald's shell and smile. You suppose he could have been lost, or just very, very roundabout. By mid-afternoon, the room is thick with sketches and murmurs. Children comparing notes, arguing gently over color terms. Is this one chalk tea or library beige? And someone's cricket chirps with wild abandon. Not yours. He's sleeping again, or pretending to. At day's end, Mr. Halbert gathers the class and has each student tape their drawings to the wall in a gentle spiral pattern, swirling out from the center where the ammonite fossil still rests in its velvet nest. The spiral becomes a gallery, a story, a snail's eye view of curiosity. You add yours, slightly crooked, just above Margaret's. She's drawn hers entirely in dots. It looks like a constellation. You whisper, "Nice," and she shrugs, but you see her smile. As you gather your things and prepare to go, Mr. Halbert pats your shoulder. "You've improved," he says softly. "Not just your sketches, you're thinking." You nod, unsure what to say. And as you walk home through mist and puddles, your satchel a little heavier with paper and possibility, your cricket chirps once, soft, clear, like the punctuation at the end of a very patient sentence. Evening finds you at the kitchen table, again Gerald's shell resting on its square of moss. The window cracked just enough to let in the sound of wind and a faint rustle of leaves. The house is hushed, the clink of dishes done, the fire in the stove burning low. You can hear your sister in the next room reading aloud to herself, pausing now and then to scold the book for being too sentimental. You don't join her. Instead, you begin to copy your latest spiral drawing into a second notebook, one with a cloth cover and a loose spine. This one is for keeps. You press a strip of sealing wax along the inside cover and affix a leaf-shaped stamp you made out of an old chess pawn. Because if you're going to chronicle snails, you might as well do it with a bit of ceremony. You title the page, "Shells of Thought," and under that, the first entry, Gerald, a dignified biscuit spiral, possible bakery affiliation. Tends toward metaphor. You smile. The rest of the evening passes in quiet movements. You sharpen your pencil. You rewrap Jarell's shell. You realign your cricket's cage. So he's angled toward the fire's warmth. He doesn't chirp, just sits, a small comma of life, waiting for your attention. You give it. Later, just before bed, you reach for your pocket guide to classification. The school issued one with brittle pages and overly serious type. You flip to the index under C and find Sepia numeralis, common banded snail. Habitat, gardens, hedgerows, temperament, docile, persistent. Diet, wide-ranging, inclined toward lettuce. Then, in a neat margin, someone else has scribbled in faint pencil, "Can carry dreams if asked nicely." You stare at that for a long time. Did someone in your class write that? Was it Margaret? Or the boy with the Emperor of Slugs story? Maybe it was from years ago, an older student who has long since moved on, whose cricket has gone quiet and whose notebooks gathered dust in some attic trunk. Either way, it feels like a message left for you. You glance at Gerald. You whisper, "Do you carry dreams?" No reply, naturally. But his shell gleams faintly in the lamplight. And really, what else do you need? Victorian education is often remembered in rigid terms: disciplined drills, ink-stained fingers, rote memorization. And yet, here you are, building tiny museums in your notebooks, recording the behaviors of creatures most adults forget exist. Historians still debate whether the children of this era were truly seen, truly heard. But your page is full. Your shell is safe. Your thoughts spiral inward, not as confusion, but as a kind of rhythm. You fold the notebook shut and stack it neatly with the others. You check on your cricket, still breathing, still quiet. And then, because the air is still and the night is soft and you're too comfortable to move, you lie back on your bed without turning out the lamp. The walls glow faintly amber. Outside, a single owl calls, once, then stops. You watch the ceiling for a while, thinking about spirals, of shells, of thoughts, of stories that begin at the edge and curl toward the center, never in haste, always in rhythm. You close your eyes, you let the spiral take you. It's Wednesday, and the weather has turned, not into sun. Exactly, but into that peculiar brightness that makes puddles glow like melted pewter and tree bark look as though it has been polished by thought. You arrive at school early today, not because you were in a rush, but because it felt like the kind of day that might reward slowness. Inside, the classroom is unusually quiet. No scraping chairs, no desk thumping. Mr. Halbert isn't here yet. A rare occurrence. Most students are perched at their desks, unsure what to do without instruction. But not you. You take out Gerald's shell, set it in the center of your desk, and just sit with it. After a while, you begin writing in your logbook not observation, but memory. You draw a timeline of your life with snails. The first one you crushed by accident. The one you tried to race across your windowsill, the dream you once had where a giant shell curled around your bed like a protective fortress. You write. Some shells are houses. Some are questions. Some are just a good excuse to pay attention. Eventually, Mr. Halbert enters, his arms full of something draped in fabric. He sets it down gently on the front table and peels back the cloth to reveal a printing press. Well, more of a press lid, really. A hand-cranked letterpress no larger than a footstool, polished, worn, slightly eccentric in its angles. It has the look of something that has both printed 1,000 pages and spent decades as a flower stand. Today, he says, you will become publishers. The class blinks, he explains. Each student will write a very small book, no more than 8 pages. Observations on shells. You'll fold and bind them yourselves using string and starch glue. Then, one by one, you'll use the press to print a single copy of the cover. This is your first published work, he says, like he's announcing knighthood. You get started immediately. The room is filled with rustling paper, inky fingertips, quiet laughter. The air smells of fresh pulp and dried glue. You write. Page 1. Title, Naturally. Page 2. A sketch of Gerald, dignified as ever. Page 3. He moved slowly, but never backward. Page 4. A drawing of your spiral chart. Page 5. A quote from someone else's chart. Possibly indecisive. Page 6. A blank page. Page 7. The quietest things taught me the most. Page 8. Authored by an... When it's your turn at the press, you take your time aligning the letters. The handle is cold, stiff, and oddly ceremonial in your grip. You feel like you're turning a wheel on a machine that remembers more than it tells. The page emerges. Slightly smudged, a little off-center, but glorious. Your name in block print. Your title, your care. You leave it to dry on the windowsill and spend the rest of the day rereading other students' books. Each one is a marvel. Shells I did not mean to collect. Advice from a silent companion. Everything spirals. Eventually, Gerald's cousins and other theories. Your cricket chirps twice perhaps in approval. Perhaps just because the sun hit his cage at a funny angle. By the time school ends, the classroom walls are lined with tiny books, pinned gently so the pages fall open like yawns. The press sits quietly in the corner now, its job done, gears resting. Historians still argue whether Victorian children produced anything of value in these whimsical assignments, whether tiny field presses, snail diaries, and mossy metaphors amounted to real learning. But you know this. You held your thoughts in your hand. You gave shape to your noticing. You turned your spiral into a story. On the walk home, you passed the bakery where Gerald was first discovered. There's no sign of his kin today, but the brick wall is still damped, and the ivy still curls downward like a snail trying to return to earth. You pause, just for a moment, and whisper, "Thank you." Not to anyone, not to anything, just into the spiral of air. By Thursday, word of the snail books has spread beyond your classroom. At recess, older students from the upper forms linger near the door, peeking inside to examine the pinned displays and delicately leaf through your spiral-bound works. Someone from the headmaster's office even stops by to lift a copy titled On the Varieties of Slimely Ambition and murmurs, unexpectedly reflective. You try not to glow with pride, but your ears do warm slightly. Today's lesson is different. No drawing, no writing. Instead, Mr. Halberd walks into class with a peculiar wooden box long, narrow, and covered in worn velvet. He places it at the front of the room with dramatic care. "This," he announces, "is the shelescope." The room falls into respectful. Even the boys who normally draw mustaches on their compasses sit up straighter. He opens the box. Inside, a brass and wood contraption resembling a microscope, but clearly older, stranger, fitted with a small mirror and glass slides carved not for plants or insects, but tiny fragments of snail shells. Tinted chips, spirals filed so thin you can see the light through them. Mr. Halberd demonstrates, adjusting the lens to show the class a magnified section of shell. "This," he says, "is calcium carbonate. But it's also architecture. It's a map. It's a record of a slow life well lived. One by one, students line up to peer through the shell. When your turn arrives, you bend over the eyepiece, adjust the angle. What you see looks like a city. Layers, curves, tiny ridges, like rooftops. The spiral is still there, but from this angle, it's become something else entirely. A landscape made of silence. You stare longer than expected. When you step back, the world feels momentarily larger. Or maybe smaller. It's hard to tell. You return to your desk and begin writing without being told. Through the lens, the shell is not a spiral, it's a story told in limestone. Every groove is a moment. Every flaw is a weather report. Around you, the class has fallen quiet again. Sketchbooks reappear. Thoughts begin to spiral, as they always do. A girl near the window whispers, "I think mine had stars in it." You don't question her. That feels right. Later in the day, Mr. Halberd opens the floor for speculative shell theory, a long-standing tradition where students may propose ideas about snails, shells, or their behaviors, regardless of scientific merit. You hear everything from, "Snails hum when it rains. We just can't hear it." Shells grow based on the dreams of the snail. Every spiral maps the snail's favorite meal, to which Mr. Halberd nods solemnly each time, saying, "Could be." When your turn comes, you stand and say, "I think shells curl inward, because that's where the best thoughts are kept." There's a pause, then several heads nod. One boy whispers, "Yeah," as if you've confirmed something he suspected all along. Your cricket chirps once timed so perfectly, the class laughs softly. Margaret adds, "Or maybe they spiral because they're shy." Mr. Halberd scribbles this on the board under the heading "Unproven but Pleasing." Before the bell rings, each student is asked to contribute one last piece to the class display. A sentence, written on a card, to summarize what they've learned from their shell. You write slowly, deliberately, then tape your card beneath your chart. Being small doesn't mean being simple. The bell rings. Your shell remains on the wall, but you carry the shelloscope image in your mind. The grooves, the light, the quiet city spiraled into being. Historians still argue whether Victorian classrooms were too fanciful, too distracted by beauty. But today, you looked inside something that most people step over, and saw a universe. Friday arrives with that peculiar buzz, the end of week, mixture of energy and exhaustion. When minds drift and fingers tap desks a little faster than usual. But in your classroom, the tone is different. Slower, more deliberate. It's the final day of your week with shells, and everyone knows it. The morning begins with an announcement. Mr. Halberd will be out for part of the day, attending a staff assembly of grave logistical importance, which, judging by his raised eyebrows, likely involves tea and arguments about storage cupboards. In his absence, Miss Allardyce from the library will oversee the class. Miss Allardyce is soft-voiced, owl-eyed, and slightly allergic to chalk. But she is also an enthusiastic believer in quiet reading and odd questions, so no one complains. Before leaving, Mr. Halberd instructs you all to prepare a final presentation, nothing grand, just a story, poem, or explanation about your week's shell. Let it be something you'd read aloud. To someone who has never noticed a snail, he says, or who's always in a hurry. He leaves. The classroom quiets. Miss Allardyce begins her supervision by asking everyone to remove their shoes for quietness, she says, and to encourage grounded thought. The room slowly fills with the smell of damp socks and pencil shavings. Somehow, this makes sense. You spend the morning working on your final piece. Not a report, not a chart, but something else. You write. A day in the life of Gerald. In it, Gerald lives peacefully in a tiny teacup beneath a geranium pot. He keeps weather notes on birch bark and writes letters to other shells about puddles he has visited. His cricket companion plays lullabies on doodle. His favorite food is sunlight. You illustrate it with gentle strokes. Gerald reclining on a moss pillow, sipping raindrops through a hollowed time stalk. It is neither scientific nor especially structured, but it is honest. You glance around. Others are writing too. A sonnet to a spiral. My shell is probably smarter than I am. What I'd say to a snail if it spoke English. Margaret's is titled, Curled Because the World is Loud. Perfect. As the morning slides toward afternoon, Miss Allardyce dims the lights and lights a single oil lamp on her desk. A nod. She says, to Shelltime storytelling traditions. One by one, students are invited to read their pieces aloud. When it's your turn, your voice trembles only a little. You read Gerald's retirement journal. The class listens. A few giggle, one sighs. At the end, Miss Allardyce claps softly, her fingers barely touching, and says, I hope I'm that content someday. The room feels warmer after that. When all have read, she asks the final question. What do you think your snail would say if it could speak? Silence. Then someone whispers, look slower. Another, I'm not lost, just turning. Margaret, you don't need to arrive. Just be. You don't speak, but you think. Thank you for carrying me, even after you were gone. The day ends with each student asked to take home their shell if they wish. Some do. Some leave theirs behind, placing them in a small wooden bowl, labeled to be remembered. You wrap Gerald again, though now his cloth feels more ceremonial, like a retirement shawl. Your cricket chirps once, gently, and you tuck his cage beside your notebook. Historians still argue whether these end-of-week projects accomplished anything beyond sentiment. But here's what you know. You listened to silence. You looked at the overlooked. You made something last. On your walk home, the puddles are drying. The trees drip softly, and you imagine Jarrell, wherever retired snails go, curled in a sunbeam. No rush, no plans, just being.